1. The Vought F4U Corsair, Whistling Death. The Vought F4U Corsair was built around one giant problem: the biggest engine and propeller ever fitted to a fighter. That propeller was over 13 feet wide, and it nearly made the whole aircraft impossible to build. Engineers solved it by bending the wings downward in an inverted gull shape, just to keep the propeller off the ground. The result was the fastest American fighter of its time, the first to break 400 miles per hour in level flight. But speed wasn't what made enemies fear it. Sound was. At high speed, air rushing through the wing root intakes created an eerie, rising whistle. Japanese troops on the ground learned that sound meant only one thing was coming next. They named it Whistling Death, and the name followed it for the rest of the war. For every Corsair lost in air combat, it brought down roughly 11 enemy aircraft. But this fearsome machine nearly killed its own pilots first. Its long nose blocked forward visibility, and it bounced violently on carrier landings. Navy sailors gave it a darker nickname of their own: the Ensign Eliminator. The Navy pulled it off carriers for almost 2 years, handing it to the Marines instead. It was on island airstrips, not carrier decks, that the Corsair built its legend. Pilots like Greg "Pappy" Boyington and his Black Sheep Squadron turned it into a Pacific nightmare for Japan. By the time engineers fixed its landing flaws, the Corsair had already become one of the most feared fighters in the sky. 2. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning, the fork-tailed devil. While the Corsair terrified pilots in the Pacific, a stranger-looking aircraft was doing the same thing over North Africa and Europe. It had 2 engines, 2 long tail booms, and a pilot sitting in a pod between them. Nothing else in the sky looked like it, and that made it instantly recognizable to friend and enemy alike. German troops in North Africa gave it a nickname that captured exactly how it felt to face one. They called it Gabelschwanz Teufel, the fork-tailed devil. Its nose-mounted guns fired in a tight, deadly cone, more accurate than fighters with guns spread across the wings. That accuracy turned supply convoys and transport planes into easy targets. In one winter campaign, Lightnings tore through German air and sea transports trying to resupply forces in North Africa. But high over Europe, the story changed. At extreme altitude, the P-38 grew sluggish, and nimble German fighters could turn inside it. So the Lightning found its real home elsewhere, in the vast skies of the Pacific. There, its long range let it strike far beyond what other fighters could reach. It was a P-38 that carried out one of the most daring missions of the entire war, intercepting and shooting down the architect of Pearl Harbor. The fork-tailed devil never stopped looking strange. It just kept winning anyway. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, the Jug. If the Lightning was strange, the next aircraft was simply massive. Pilots called it the Jug, short for its heavy barrel-shaped fuselage. It was one of the heaviest single-engine fighters ever built, powered by a giant air-cooled radial engine. That engine choice seemed like a disadvantage at first. It turned out to be the Thunderbolt's greatest strength. Unlike liquid-cooled engines, a single bullet through a coolant line couldn't bring it down. Individual cylinders could be shot away, and the engine would simply keep running on the rest. One pilot returned home after his Thunderbolt absorbed over 200 hits and kept flying. A German pilot reportedly saluted the wreck in disbelief before flying off. Early on, German pilots mocked the Jug's clumsy shape and laughed at its chances. By 1945, many of those same pilots admitted they didn't laugh anymore. Its real fear factor came on the ground, not in the air. Loaded with 8 machine guns, bombs, and rockets, it became a nightmare for tanks, trains, and retreating columns. German troops dreaded a sound they couldn't predict: a Thunderbolt diving out of nowhere before flak crews could even respond. It destroyed more enemy aircraft on the ground than most fighters destroyed in the air. The Jug never looked elegant. It just refused to stop coming. 4. The North American P-51 Mustang. For years, German pilots had one major advantage: distance. American bombers had escorts, but those escorts couldn't follow them all the way to the target and back. Once the fighters turned for home, German pilots knew the bombers were alone. That gap in the sky was where the Luftwaffe felt safest. Then a new fighter showed up with enough fuel to go the entire distance. The P-51 Mustang wasn't even built for high-altitude combat at first. Its early engine simply wasn't powerful enough. Everything changed when engineers paired the airframe with a British Rolls-Royce engine built for thin, high air. Suddenly, this fighter could fly fast, fly far, and fly high enough to fight at the same altitude as the bombers it protected. By 1944, Mustangs were escorting bombers all the way to Berlin and back. For the first time, German pilots found enemy fighters waiting for them over their own cities. There was no longer a safe gap to retreat into. That single change helped break the back of the German Air Force before the Allied invasion of Europe even began. It wasn't the loudest fighter, it wasn't the toughest, but it took away the one thing the enemy depended on most. 5. The Boeing B-29 Flying Fortress. Every fighter on this list existed to protect something. This aircraft was the reason they needed to. The B-29 was built to prove a daring idea: that a bomber could defend itself well enough to fly into enemy territory without an escort at all. Some carried up to 13 machine guns covering nearly every angle of attack. In tight formation, dozens of B-17s could bring over 200 guns to bear on any fighter that got close. On paper, it looked unstoppable. In practice, German pilots found the one angle the guns covered worst, straight from the front. Closing head-on at enormous speed, fighters had only seconds to fire, but so did the bombers. Losses climbed so high in 1943 that deep raids into Germany had to be paused entirely. Yet the B-17 kept earning its nickname for a different reason. Stories spread of bombers limping home with engines destroyed, tails shredded, and crews still alive inside. It dropped more bomb tonnage on Germany than any other American aircraft of the war. Eventually, the Mustang gave it what it always needed, an escort that never had to turn back. Together, they finished what the Flying Fortress alone never quite could. 6. The Boeing B-29 Superfortress. If the B-17 was a fortress, the next aircraft was something closer to a flying weapon of last resort. The B-29 had a pressurized cabin, remote-controlled gun turrets, and engines more powerful than anything built before it. It could fly higher, farther, and carry more bombs than any bomber that came before it. But its real impact came when commanders changed the entire plan. Instead of high-altitude daylight raids, B-29s were sent in low, at night, loaded almost entirely with incendiary bombs. Japanese cities, built largely from wood and paper, had no defense against fire on that scale. On a single night in March 1945, hundreds of B-29s firebombed Tokyo and created a firestorm that consumed the city. It was the deadliest bombing raid of the entire war. Months later, two modified B-29s carried out missions no aircraft had ever flown before. They dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, ending the war without a single invasion. No aircraft on this list ever inspired more fear or more controversy than this one. 6 different aircraft, 6 different reasons to be afraid. Some were feared for their sound, some for their silence, some for what they carried underneath their wings, but every one of them was built to solve one problem and ended up rewriting the rules of the war in the sky.